Hi, my name is Courtney Oglesby, and the topic of my action research paper was determining if and how read-alouds impact student motivation in their own independent reading. The research question that I formed was, how do read-alouds motivate students to read independently? My primary purpose behind developing this question was to evaluate if in fact read-alouds are a good use of instructional time and how they impact students in their independent reading. From personal experience, I have seen the benefits of read-alouds and how they expose students to a variety of texts and foster valuable conversations centered around quality literature. Read-alouds are something that I do in my classroom regularly, and I've firsthand seen the benefits of what read-alouds can do for a child, how they motivate students, especially struggling learners, because they're getting exposure to texts that are above their reading level, and so they're gaining experience with some more richer, valuable pieces of literature, and especially that higher level vocabulary. My literature review portion of the paper begins with a look at the foundational theories that surround read-alouds. The main ideas in this section of the literature review emphasize how background knowledge is built when regular read-alouds are conducted in the classroom. Additionally, vocabulary is increased and rich discussion is also fostered, all valuable components when encouraging and motivating young readers to become engaged in the reading process. Secondly, another present theme that emerged in my research was the role the teacher has in read-alouds and student motivation. It is important to remember when conducting a read-aloud, a teacher needs to have purpose and intentionality behind his or her selection of the book, and that the read-aloud adds value and meaning. Read-alouds have the power to expose students to a variety of genres and authors, thus helping them develop a preference towards their own book selections. A diverse classroom library also needs to be available to the students so they can explore their reading interests and have access to texts that are within their independent and instructional reading level. So if you're conducting read-alouds but you don't have a resource or a place where they can go to further explore maybe some interesting topics or themes they saw developed in the read-alouds, then they're not able to fully grow or use what they've seen in read-alouds in their own independent reading. So it's very important, the research showed, to have resources, a classroom library, to back up whatever was being taught, modeled in the read-alouds. Lastly, modeling of strong reading practices is another value that read-alouds contribute. Students are able to see these best practices modeled and implement them in their own reading. The last section of my literature review takes a look at student interest and motivation in reading. Student interest plays a vital role in read-alouds. A teacher must understand what interests and engages his or her students before being able to make quality read-aloud selections. Ways to gather data regarding student interest could involve administering a reading interest survey or questionnaire at the beginning of the year, or even throughout the year, for their interests will most certainly change if you're introducing them to a variety of texts throughout the year. Read-alouds also have an impact on student motivation for several reasons. One being that students see there is a choice in making reading selections. Read-alouds show variety in genres, topics, themes, etc. This helps the student gain awareness of all the books that might possibly interest him or her. Secondly, there is a community that is formed when shared reading occurs. And lastly, relationships are formed where readers feel comfortable sharing connections from what they are reading. In my methods section of my paper, you will see that the study was conducted at a private school in a third grade classroom, and there were 10 participants. The data collection involved administering the MRQ twice, once at the beginning and the end of the study, taking field notes during the read-aloud time. Student journals would also be provided, where they are reflecting once a week after their library time and being asked questions revolving around their book selections, such as, what did you like about this book? How did you decide on this genre? Did you choose this book because it was part of a series? How did you hear about this book? What type of books do you normally like to read? So really evaluating the book selection process. Here's an example of the motivational reading questionnaire that would be administered during the study. And then here is the conference questions that have been strategically constructed to evaluate student choice or student book selections. for their decision making in the book selection process. Analysis of the data involves examining the MRQ and specifically looking at the social and curiosity categories, noting if any changes occurred. For this is where I saw some links and connections to read alouds. Additionally, analyzing field notes and student conferences, noting any trends or patterns that emerge through conversations indicating connections between read alouds and student motivation and independent reading. Student journals would also be evaluated through the use of a checklist. And here's the checklist that I would use to be able to code their journals. In my discussion and implications section, I address how this action research paper would add to literature available on read alouds and its ability to motivate students. Read alouds provide exposure to a variety of texts that help students develop an awareness for their own book preferences, and tools such as the MRQ are useful in understanding what motivates and interests students. Finally, educators must be aware of students' reading needs and interests when selecting quality literature for read alouds. In conclusion, overall, there are positive implications for conducting read alouds in the classroom, and compelling students in the classroom are compelling. Students are exposed to quality literature, engage in a shared reading experience, and see proficient reading strategies modeled. I have listed my big takeaways below. The MRQ is a very valuable tool that allows the teacher to better understand how a student is motivated in their readings. The MRQ may be administered throughout the year to evaluate a change in students' interests and motivation. Knowing the students is another important reminder when conducting read alouds. And then access to quality and high volumes of literature is key to creating an authentic and accessible classroom that fosters a love of reading. Here are my references that I used in this presentation. Thank you for listening, and I hope you found this information useful and informative.